Kia ora everyone and welcome to our panel. On stage with us, we have Nikora Ngaropo, a business owner of a number of technology companies and an advisor to the Aotearoa Digital Minister in his role as a member of the Digital Council.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nikora. We also have the amazing powerhouse of Kaye Maree Dunn, a Māori woman in tech, and a managing director of two successful digitech businesses, one of which we got to have visibility of here earlier, and is focused in supporting Indigenous business and growth. And we also have Latashia Redhouse. She is the program director of the AIF Intertribal Agricultural Council, and she has a passion to inspire Indigenous professionals to offer solutions to help grow our business. So ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Greetings to you all and welcome to our stage.
Kia ora.
Nikora, is this the first time you've been on stage?
No, I had
Excellent.
a panel the other day.
Great. The reason why I asked, because I was just going to ask whether we want to do a flow through of mihis and introductions to our audience. But what I will do, I'd love it if you could all actually talk to our audience and explain what you do in the technology space very briefly.
Okay. Kia ora everybody, my name is Nikora Ngaropo. I work in the technology space. My major areas are education and also animation and technology. Part of my role currently is that as a member of the Digital Council is I advise on all digital and data-driven initiatives across community and government and help our minister understand those problems. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Nikora. Kaye Maree?
Kia ora. Kia ora tātou, I'm Kaye Maree Dunn. One of my companies, I'm a purveyor and lover of digital technology to help grow our reach and our influence in communications and in data. And the other company, Aho NZ Limited, we've built a decentralised technology to protect and look after archival systems and genealogy. I'm non-technical, so I have a whole crew of developers that help make sense of my visioning as a non-technical person.
Excellent. Kia ora, Kaye Maree. Latashia?
Yeah. So my space in the digital world is I try to provide solution and education and strategies to help communicate and build brand awareness for the different producers or Native American businesses that are in the American Indian Foods Program.
Excellent, kia ora, and welcome. Just to kick us off, because we're here to talk about digital inclusion, and it would be really great if we could explore what that means to this panel. So Latashia, what does digital inclusion mean to you?
Well, I think that digital inclusion means so many different things when I'm looking at kind of seeing what my Native American communities are experiencing in these rural spaces. I mean, some of the Native communities do not have access to Wi-Fi or may not have access to electricity. And so I feel like when we're talking about that inclusivity, I feel like that should be just something that we need to increase and push more opportunities in that direction for our Native peoples to, again, share their stories, to share and protect their ideas. So yeah, kind of digital inclusion just means that they have access to Wi-Fi and they have access to electricity.
Yeah, access to infrastructure is one of the biggest things that we're seeing play through from that inclusion perspective. Kaye Maree, you mentioned earlier on stage, actually, when you were having a conversation with Dale around the inclusion and accessibility issues. Where are you seeing digital inclusion and your concept of how that fits or what it is?
I agree that infrastructure is a critical part, and it's absolutely necessary that we have the backbone of digital access. The second part, I would say, is workforce, so ensuring that Indigenous people, Māori, can actually enter into the workforce equitably and are supported to be able to flourish in that space. I think the third part is the real challenge of digital poverty. So whilst everything is moving online, we're also looking at the increase of digital services and government services moving into the cloud. I've got a very deep concern that many of our older people who might not know how to navigate technology won't be included in that, but also many of our whānau or families that don't have access to devices also won't be able to participate in the new world.
And Nikora, what does digital inclusion mean for you?
For me, digital inclusion is about our whānau, our family, our people thriving and not just surviving. You know, I do believe that in terms of where we're currently sitting, we still have problems with infrastructure. We still have problems with getting access, and access is a huge thing. But if we're truly talking about digital inclusion, it has to be more than just being included. It has to be a space where we're actually engaged, where we're doing things, where we are using the technology to better ourselves and help our own people.
Yeah, thriving, not surviving. That's a great way to frame that. Just while I'm with you, Nikora, in your role on the Digital Council, how do you explain the importance of Indigenous inclusive technology to the ministers?
We're actually quite lucky. So in Aotearoa, our minister is quite open to a lot of those ideas. He realises that there is a digital divide and there are differences between where our peoples are currently sitting, especially for Māori. So I think that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but it's starting to happen. You know, it is starting to happen. We do have things like Digital Boost, where the government is getting behind initiatives. We've got the Māori Enablement Fund as another. So there are pots of funding, there are people there that are pushing to try and make equality and equity a thing within Aotearoa.
Latashia, in America and the US, how is the government responding to digital inclusion there? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, I think the current administration is really valuing the voices of Indigenous communities that are expressing the need of immediate action and towards, that connection to internet services. And so there seems to be a huge movement to provide that type of infrastructure. And so I think expanding that broadband access is something that is very critical and important to our administration now.
And are you seeing that play out in your tribal areas?
I feel like there are some producers that are not producers, but some communities that have received like broadband grant money to build that infrastructure, but only time will tell. We will hopefully, we can really see more communities, these rural and remote communities, have access to internet, so they can all enjoy Netflix every now and then.
Excellent. Kaye Maree, in your space, you're actually working at the coalface with a lot of our Māori families and trying to help advance them. Where do you see the key opportunities are in the work that you're doing?
I think that of late, the Crown have done an excellent job of trying to build infrastructure around our marae or our communal meeting houses, which I think is fantastic. So that means more rural-based digital connectivity hubs. On top of that, they've also invested in programs, marae-based programs, so that families and communities can have access to technology. So that's also fantastic. And what that's doing, even though you might not see it immediately, but it helps to normalise the language and normalise the behaviour and practice around the use of technology and digital technologies in the home, from understanding what is a Google, how to do a Google search, how to actually use digital banking. And so having a by Māori, for Māori approach to that training, I think, is a long-term investment, but a really fantastic start. On top of that, I'm seeing young people, or a significant investment in young people entering into the digital space. And then you're also seeing a lot of people that have been disrupted out of their current work or employment and seeking more opportunities in tech. And so what we're seeing now is an increase and an uptake in coding, development, animation, and also virtual skills, virtual administration skills as well. So it's exciting, but I don't think that we are doing enough. I think we're just starting, and I think we could do a hell of a lot better.
And I just want to pick up on that point, and we were discussing it earlier around pipeline workforce. How do we get our young kids into technology? Nikora, actually, you're perfect to talk about this, given your recent project.
Yeah, so for me, technology has to be relevant for the user. If it's not relevant from their worldview, it's something that goes on the wayside. So being able to engage youth, we need to be mindful around how they're utilising the technology, how we can see it being used better. Also having input from them as well, like using their ideas, giving them a safe space so that they can be part of the conversation and developing some of the policy as well. You know, when we all pass on, when we get older, it'll be their generation that moves into these positions of power. They need the ability to be able to feed into the system at an early age so that when they are there, they can create impact.
Yeah, one of the things that I guess bothers me at this point is we're creating a pipeline, and we've got some great initiatives coming through and getting our Māori and Indigenous people into technology, but it's around the environment that they move into post coming out, because it's still very much a non-Māori world where they'll go out and find jobs as we continue to build up businesses that they could potentially feed into, but we're not there yet. What's the kind of messages you've got for the big corporates out there when they receive these young, visionary, talented Māori youth as they come out into that workforce?
I think the workforces need to be prepared for the new brown workforce that are coming. And so that means having more culturally appropriate workplaces, understanding, and there are many that are wanting to become te tiriti dynamic or treaty dynamic, which means that they want to move beyond tokenism. They want to actually invest in creating safe spaces for Māori and Pacifica youth and others to come into the workplace. But I think one of the cool things that I've also seen in the community is these spaces seem scary because they don't look like us. But the truth is that these places are ours, we just have to own them. And one of the things that I really loved seeing is the creation of new atua, which is a bit edgy, but it's actually quite cool in that atua that are, or gods or deities that relate or connected to technology, which means that there is a relationship and connection there where we can see a whakapapa or a genealogical connection to technology, which means that it's not this faraway thing that doesn't connect to me. Actually, I'm part of this technology. And we've got a history, a very, very long history of adaptation, which Hoturo spoke to as a navigator, that we have always been early adopters of new technologies. It's not a new thing. So with workplaces, when they need to understand how do we become a safer place or a better place for Māori, it's do not underestimate our intelligence, do not underestimate our capability to add value, and trainers who are bringing these individuals through the pipeline, also you still need to be good at your craft. You must be good at your craft, and there are no freebies or easy deals, but you've got to learn to be onto it enough and resilient enough to handle yourself in those non-Māori workplaces.
Fantastic advice, Kaye Maree. Latashia, do you see similar sorts of issues in America?
Yeah, I definitely do. When I'm not raising my kids on the reservation, but there are definitely disparities between, especially when it comes to digital type of education. So my son has access to robotics, coding, and those are like required classes that he has to take. Whereas I look back on the school that I attended, there's no robotics team, there's no coding team. So there's definitely that division, that gap there. And then I think also when we're talking about digital opportunities, I think it kind of they don't see the intertwining of how digital kind of encapsulates all industry. So even though I'm in ag, I still utilize digital tools to communicate with the broader audience. So I'm using digital strategies like social media, all of these different tools to really kind of build these opportunities. And I think kind of when we're talking to the Indigenous youth, we can share that there is this bigger realm around digital, not just the one little industry that defines what digital industries are, what digital tools are available. But yeah, I think there's that kind of divide. There's like a little bit of differences as I'm looking at it through a lens as a mother. There's definitely some different things that I feel like we could revisit and build to encourage the next generation.
Excellent. And just so you mentioned your field of agriculture. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing in the agri-tech space that excites you around technology?
Well, currently, storytelling is a huge thing right now. Really reclaiming who we are as people, really reclaiming our food systems. So it's using these digital tools to really share these stories that haven't been shared for decades long has been a really big movement that I'm really excited about. Most nations are kind of these, thank you, they are verbal in their storytelling. And so now we're able to capture all of that and use these tools to really vocalize that globally.
It's fantastic. Nikora, in your role in advising the Minister, what role do you think policy plays in moving our digital inclusion forward?
I think policy is one of the main ones. The problem with policy is that it's made by policymakers and not necessarily the people. So there is discrepancies between what people understand down here and what gets done up here a lot of the time. And for me personally, I would love to see policies being broken down and shared in a much simpler form for the average person so that they know what it means. For the Minister in his role, there's always a tension between the needs of the people and what can actually be done. And then the speed at which it can be done. Mm. So there are a lot of initiatives, and there is a huge amount of people and energy that are driving some of these things. But sometimes they do miss the mark. And sometimes they don't necessarily hit who they're supposed to hit or service those people they're supposed to service. And so I do think that there's a space there for the average everyday person to have more of a say in that, and for government to be able to break that down and just make it accessible. I advise, and I still find policy very hard to read. If I find it hard to read, how is my auntie who's back in the marae or back at home, how is she going to understand what's happening? She doesn't have a space to be included in that conversation, and therefore she's excluded. Mm. Yeah.
So, and Kaye Maree, also, there's a policy perspective. Then there's mainstream corporates who have quite a distinctive hold over digital inclusion. What role do you think they have to play in moving forward?
I'm just rubbing my chin a little there because it's tricky. It doesn't have to be overly tricky. There are some really good examples of some companies that are wanting to partner with Indigenous peoples, with Māori. Is it tokenistic, or is it that they're about sharing power and opportunity? But I think actually where the rubber hits the road is at the commercial side. So if these companies really want to, actually a practical example is the translation of te reo Māori. And so Microsoft, one of the largest companies in the world, has a translation function inside of its software. Now, it's freely available to anyone that uses the Microsoft product. However, there are some commercial advantages, and that money is not given back to tribes, it's not given back to whānau or communities, it's housed and utilised for Microsoft to continue its own objectives. I will be mindful also that I do know some people, some of my best friends work in Microsoft. However, there are amazing Indigenous-led initiatives like Te Huku Media, who have been utilising Indigenous AI, Indigenous thinking, Indigenous frameworks in protecting and supporting language revitalisation and language retention. And they are one of the first non-institutional organisations to have received a significant multi-million-dollar grant to be able to protect our language. And they have been operating in a way where they do not want commercial or corporate interests involved in that, because they know that they don't have the same level of protection to our people that they would as an Indigenous-led entity.
Thank you. And Latashia, do you have any examples in the States that you've seen where you've seen their independence break away and examples of Indigenous technology companies moving forward like that?
Yeah, there seems to be this pop-up of different app builders that are trying to emphasize language revitalization. On the Navajo reservation, they have the Navajo app that is made by Navajo, which is really cool and awesome because I can just give it to my kids while I'm on a Zoom call. So there seems to be this huge movement, like she mentioned, that there is this to revitalize and connect with our culture, connect with our language, and to continue to keep those teachings passing through our next generation. So I'm really excited to see what else comes. But I think one of the things we're constantly dealing with too is intellectual property. And in this digital space, it's really hard to kind of, protect all of that because it's so accessible. And so that's something we're trying to make sure that in this space, we're still protecting our Indigenous peoples, and we're making sure that every story, every different language out there is still protected by that tribe. And so when you're talking about inclusivity, we also want to make sure that there's that other level of when do we say no, and then limit, so that way we protect that IP.
Yeah, no, that's critical, saying it. We've seen similar patterns in New Zealand around data sovereignty and data ownership and those sorts of things. So I'm just looking at the time. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm just going to pass around the room. If you've got any last words to the audience around your future or what you see, if we can break the barriers around digital inclusion, the thriving economy, the thriving digital environment, what would it be?
For a start, for Aotearoa, I'd just like to see every family have internet. Broadband internet provides access to education, information, it's core infrastructure. It should be a right in this day and age. So if there was one thing, I'd like to see that, because there's a lot that can come from that.
Awesome. Kaye Maree?
I think there's an opportunity in platform play. So too often we've been the users of technology, not the creators of it. And I think to move into the place of creators of technology, the owners of it, that's a place that I'd like to see Indigenous peoples elevate to. We're playing a role in protecting the planet. We're playing a significant role in protecting our natural resources. We also can play a significant role as values-based communities to help protect the digital stratosphere and actually play a role in developing new platforms and new technologies, emergent technologies, and helping to influence those new technologies as well. So in order for us to enter into that space, and I just want to acknowledge Nikora, because he embedded this in my mind, is that we have to start young. In order for us to compete internationally, many communities, many other countries are investing in their children and entering into technology. To understand the fundamentals of an engineering mind, you actually have to start mathematics and STEM very young. So we could be also including more intensified STEM training at a younger age so that we can connect and participate. And then the final point is around relationships, because we're actually 20 years behind other countries. So instead of us trying to catch up, let's be smart. We have a practice called Tomo, which is marriages, intentional marriages. So I think we should invite Indigenous and other populations to come to Aotearoa, marry into our communities as they did in the old days, and actually bring their knowledge and skills to support us to grow.
Wonderful. Last word, Latashia?
Yeah, definitely infrastructure. It's super critical, and I hope that that changes rapidly and not something that takes decades. Because right now my mom can't even shop and have something shipped to her rural address, and so it'd be nice for me to be like, "Hey, I got this for you." So, and I don't have to notify her and let her know that a gift is kind of on its way, but. Infrastructure is a huge thing. Youth involvement is a huge thing. I would love to see more youth involved. And then just diversity in that corporate space. I've gone to visit like Adobe or Microsoft, and I had not met one Indigenous person on the workforce. And it would be absolutely amazing and phenomenal if we could see more Indigenous peoples on the workforce. So if we can change that landscape, I think I'd be happy.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful insights. Can we have a round of applause for our panel, please?
Yeah.